I woke up to find an Apache woman in my room, she said. I'm only staying for one night. He woke up slowly, the way a person does when sleep has been uneasy. For a moment he stayed still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Something felt off. The air seemed heavier, as if the room was holding a secret. He noticed the faint smell of coffee, even though he knew he had not made any. That was when the unease settled fully in his chest. He turned his head and froze. There was a woman sitting on the chair near the window. She was awake, already dressed, her posture straight and alert. The morning light fell across her face, calm but guarded. She did not look surprised to see him wake up. Instead, she looked as if she had been waiting. His heart began to pound. He pushed himself upright, pulling the blanket closer out of instinct, his mind racing through questions. How had she gotten there? Why was she in his room? Had he forgotten something important the night before? Before he could speak, she broke the silence. I'm only staying for one night, she said quietly. Her voice was steady, not demanding, not apologetic, just factual. He blinked, trying to understand the situation. He recognized her then vaguely. She was an Apache woman he had met only once before, months ago, at a small gathering through mutual friends. They had spoken briefly, exchanged polite words, and then gone their separate ways. There had been nothing memorable enough to explain her presence here now. He cleared his throat and asked the first question that came to his mind, keeping his voice calm even though his thoughts were not. She explained that a trusted acquaintance had brought her there late the previous night. He had been exhausted after a long day of work and remembered being woken briefly, told that someone needed a safe place to rest. In his half-asleep state, he had agreed without fully processing it. Now, in the light of morning, reality had caught up with him. She stood up slowly, careful not to invade his space. She told him she would leave as soon as the sun was higher. She did not want trouble. She did not want explanations. She only needed a quiet night, and now it was almost over. He studied her as she spoke. There was tiredness in her eyes, but also strength. She carried herself with dignity, like someone used to standing on her own. Whatever had brought her here had not broken her spirit, but it had clearly weighed on her. He nodded, still unsure what to say. He told her she could stay until she was ready to go. He offered coffee, more out of habit than planning. She accepted with a small nod, watching him carefully as he moved around the room. As he stepped into the kitchen, his thoughts spun. He was not afraid, but he was alert. Life on the ranch had taught him to read people quickly. She did not feel like a threat. She felt like someone who had been pushed into a corner and had chosen caution over desperation. They sat at the small table, the space between them filled with quiet understanding. He did not push for details. He asked simple questions, if she had slept, if she needed anything before leaving. She answered briefly, choosing her words carefully. The house felt different with her in it, not uncomfortable, just changed. The early morning light moved across the walls, and the sounds of birds outside seemed louder than usual. Time slowed, as if both of them were aware that this moment would not last long. She looked around the room once more, as if memorizing it. He noticed how her hands rested calmly in her lap, though her shoulders stayed tense. Whatever story lay behind her presence, she was not ready to share it. He respected that. After a while, she spoke again. She thanked him for not asking too many questions. She said trust was not something she gave easily. He told her he understood, even if he did not fully. Sometimes people needed space more than solutions. As the morning continued, he realized how strange life could be. One night of kindness, given without thought, had brought a stranger into his home and into his awareness. He sensed that this encounter would leave a mark, even if it ended by noon. When she finally stood and picked up her bag, she repeated her words from earlier, softer this time. She had meant what she said. One night was all she had intended. He walked her to the door without trying to stop her, without offering promises he could not keep. She paused on the porch, meeting his eyes. There was something unspoken there, gratitude, caution, and the knowledge that brief moments could still matter. Then she turned and walked away, leaving behind a quiet house and a man who would spend the rest of the day thinking about how unexpectedly life could change before breakfast. After she left that morning, he tried to return to his normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. The house was quiet again, yet the silence felt different, heavier. He washed the coffee cup slowly, replaying the short conversations in his mind. He kept telling himself it was just one unexpected night, nothing more. Still, her calm voice and steady eyes stayed with him throughout the day. He went out to do his work, focusing on tasks that usually kept his mind clear. The land, the animals, and the steady rhythm of physical work had always helped him think. But that day, his thoughts wandered. He wondered where she had gone, whether she had reached a safe place, and what kind of burden had pushed her to accept shelter from someone she barely knew. He reminded himself that she had asked for only one night, and he had respected that. There was comfort in knowing he had done the right thing. Still, questions lingered. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with soft colors, his phone rang. He did not recognize the number at first. When he answered, he was surprised to hear her voice on the other end. She apologized for calling without warning. She explained that she had thought about their brief conversation all day. She said she had not expected kindness to feel so unfamiliar. The words came slowly, as if she was choosing each one with care. He told her she did not need to apologize. He was glad to hear that she was safe. There was a pause, then she asked if they could talk for a few minutes. He agreed. Their conversation was cautious at first. They spoke about simple things: the weather, the long roads, the way days seemed to stretch endlessly when life felt uncertain. Gradually, the space between their words softened. She did not explain everything, but she shared enough for him to understand that she was navigating a difficult moment in her life. She spoke about responsibility, about standing strong even when the ground felt unsteady. She talked about her community and how deeply she valued where she came from, even when it brought challenges. He listened without interrupting, offering understanding instead of advice. He shared a little about himself too. He told her about his quiet life, his work, and how he had learned that sometimes listening mattered more than fixing things. The conversation flowed naturally, without pressure. When the call ended, he realized how much time had passed. He felt a calm he had not expected. The connection was not intense or dramatic, it was simple and real. That made it feel stronger. Over the next few days, they exchanged messages occasionally. Nothing constant, nothing demanding. Just brief check-ins, small updates, and thoughtful words. Each message carried a sense of respect for space and boundaries. They met again a week later in a public place by mutual agreement. There was no rush, no expectation. When they saw each other, there was recognition but no surprise. They talked over simple food, sitting across from one another like two people learning a new rhythm. This time, she shared more of her story. She spoke about moments of loss and resilience, about choices that had shaped her path. She explained that independence had always been important to her, but even the strongest people sometimes needed rest. He admired her honesty. He did not feel the need to fill the silence when it came. He let her speak at her own pace. In return, she listened to him with the same attention. As the days turned into weeks, their conversations grew deeper. They did not meet often, but when they did, time seemed to slow. There was comfort in familiarity, built not on excitement but on understanding. He noticed how she observed the world carefully, how she valued actions more than words. She noticed how he remained steady, never pushing, never assuming. Trust grew quietly between them. One afternoon, as they walked along a quiet path, she told him that staying one night had reminded her that help could exist without conditions. She said it had changed how she viewed people outside her circle. He told her that her presence had reminded him that life could still surprise him in meaningful ways. Neither of them labeled what was forming between them. There was no need. They were two individuals sharing moments, respecting the pace that felt right. There were challenges too. Some days she withdrew, needing time alone. He respected that, giving her space without question. Other days he struggled with his own doubts, wondering whether connection always carried risk. Still, they continued step by step. The bond they built was grounded in reality, not fantasy. It was shaped by patience, honesty, and mutual respect. Each meeting added a layer of understanding, making the connection stronger without overwhelming it. By the end of that season, both of them had changed in quiet ways. He had learned that opening his door had opened his perspective. She had learned that trusting someone did not mean losing herself. Their story did not move quickly, and it did not need to. It unfolded naturally, shaped by real moments and thoughtful choices. And as they looked ahead, neither of them knew exactly where the path would lead. But both understood that something meaningful had begun, starting from one unexpected night that turned into many shared conversations and a growing sense of trust. As time passed, the calm connection they had built began to face quiet pressure. It did not come from arguments or harsh words, but from the weight of real life. Both of them carried responsibilities that could not be ignored, and slowly, those responsibilities started to test what they were building. One evening, she asked if they could talk somewhere quiet. They met at a small park just outside town, where the noise of traffic faded into the background. The air was cool, and the sky was turning soft shades of orange and blue. He sensed that this conversation would be different. She took a long breath before speaking. Her hands rested together, fingers gently clasped, but her shoulders were tense. She told him that the time had come for her to be honest about why she had needed that one night of shelter. She had not shared the full truth before because she was not sure she would be understood. She explained that she was standing at a crossroads in her life. There were expectations placed on her from many sides: family, community, and her own sense of duty. She was trying to make decisions that honored where she came from while also protecting her future. The balance was not easy, and sometimes it felt impossible. He listened carefully, keeping his eyes on her, not interrupting. He could hear the strength in her voice, but also the strain. She was not asking for answers. She was asking to be heard. She told him that trust had always been difficult for her. Life had taught her to rely on herself first. Depending on others had often led to disappointment or misunderstanding. That was why she had been so clear about staying only one night. She had needed control over at least one part of her situation. He nodded, letting her know he understood. He told her that he respected her honesty and her need for independence. He admitted that he had sensed there was more beneath the surface but had chosen not to push. He believed that people shared their stories when they were ready, not when they were questioned. That honesty deepened their connection, but it also brought a new awareness. They both realized that what they were building could not stay simple forever. Feelings, once acknowledged, had a way of asking for clarity. Over the next few days, their conversations grew more serious. They talked about boundaries, about what they could and could not offer each other. There were no raised voices, no dramatic moments. Just thoughtful words and long pauses filled with reflection. She made it clear that she could not make promises she might not be able to keep. Her life was still uncertain, and she needed the freedom to make difficult choices without feeling held back. He told her that he did not want to be a reason for hesitation or regret. He wanted to support her strength, not replace it. At the same time, he faced his own questions. He had grown used to a quiet life, one shaped by routine and independence. Letting someone in had already changed that. He wondered if he was ready for the kind of patience this connection required. He wondered if caring deeply always came with the risk of loss. One afternoon, they took a long drive together, not speaking much. The road stretched ahead, open and quiet. The landscape seemed to reflect their thoughts, wide, honest, and uncertain. Sometimes words were not needed to understand what the other was feeling. She finally broke the silence. She said that meeting him had challenged some of her beliefs. She had always thought that relying on herself was the only safe way forward. Yet his steady presence had shown her that support could exist without control. He told her that she had reminded him that strength came in many forms. He admired how she held onto her identity, even when life tried to reshape it. He did not want to change her path, only walk beside her for as long as their paths aligned. Despite the understanding they shared, tension remained. There were days when she grew distant, pulling back into herself. He respected that, even when it left him uncertain. There were days when he questioned whether silence meant reflection or retreat. Eventually, she asked for time. Not distance out of fear, but space to think clearly. She said she needed to make decisions without feeling influenced, even by care and kindness. She needed to know that her choices were truly her own. Though it was difficult, he agreed. He told her that he would be there if she reached out, but he would not follow or pressure her. Trust, he believed, also meant knowing when to step back. The days that followed were quiet. He returned to his routines, but everything felt slightly altered. The land looked the same, the work continued, yet his perspective had shifted. He understood now that some connections were not meant to provide comfort alone, they were meant to teach. She spent that time reflecting as well. She revisited memories, weighed responsibilities, and listened closely to her own voice. She thought about the night she had knocked on his door, unsure of what she would find. That single choice had opened a door inside her as well. When she finally reached out again, her message was simple. She thanked him for respecting her space. She said that his patience had given her clarity, not confusion. They met once more, not to define the future but to acknowledge the present. They talked honestly about what they could continue and what they might need to let go of. There was no bitterness, only understanding. They recognized that real connections did not always follow neat paths. Sometimes they existed to guide, not to stay. As they parted that day, there was no dramatic goodbye, just a shared look that carried appreciation and respect. Whatever came next, both of them knew that this chapter had mattered. Part 3 of their story was not about loss or certainty. It was about truth. It was about two people learning that caring deeply also meant honoring independence. And it was about understanding that even when paths became unclear, the lessons gained could remain clear for a lifetime. Time moved forward quietly after their last honest conversation. Nothing dramatic happened right away. There were no sudden decisions or strong emotions pulling them in one direction. Instead, life continued in its usual rhythm, but both of them felt changed inside. For him, each day began early, just as it always had. The land still needed care. The animals still depended on routine, and work still demanded focus. On the outside, everything looked the same, but inside his thoughts had grown deeper. He found himself thinking more carefully about people, about timing, and about how some moments stayed with a person longer than expected. He often remembered the first morning she had been in his house. Not because it was shocking anymore, but because it had quietly shifted something in him. Before her, he had lived with clear boundaries, rarely allowing unexpected things to enter his life. After her, he understood that not all surprises brought trouble. Some brought awareness. She too had returned to her responsibilities. Her days were full, sometimes heavy, but she carried herself with purpose. She focused on what needed to be done, drawing strength from her roots and her values. Yet in quiet moments she thought about him. Not in a way that distracted her, but in a way that reminded her of balance. She had always believed that relying on herself was the safest path. Life had taught her that lesson early. Still, his patience had shown her another truth. Independence did not have to mean isolation. Knowing that support could exist without pressure gave her confidence, not weakness. They did not speak often during this time. When they did, Their conversations were thoughtful and calm. There were no expectations placed on the words they shared. Sometimes a short message was enough. Other times they spoke on the phone, discussing everyday things. These small connections felt steady, not demanding. One afternoon, several weeks later, she asked if they could meet again. Not to talk about the future, but simply to spend time. He agreed without hesitation. They chose a quiet place away from crowds, where conversation could flow naturally or pause without feeling awkward. When they met, there was an ease between them. No tension, no uncertainty hanging in the air. They walked slowly, talking about work, about changes they had noticed in themselves. She mentioned that she felt clearer now, more grounded. He said that he felt more open, less rigid than before. She told him that taking time apart had helped her listen to her own thoughts without outside influence. She had needed that space to feel confident in her choices. He told her that giving her space had not been easy, but it had taught him something important about trust. They spoke honestly about what they could continue to share. Neither of them wanted to force anything into a shape that did not fit. They agreed that whatever connection existed between them should remain respectful and real. There was no need to define it with labels. As the sun lowered in the sky, she thanked him again, not for shelter, but for understanding. She said that his quiet support had made a difference during a time when she felt unsure. He replied that knowing her had expanded his view of strength and resilience. After that meeting, their interactions became more natural. Sometimes they spent time together, sometimes they went weeks without seeing each other. There was no sense of loss in the distance. Instead, there was trust that connection did not fade just because space existed. People around him noticed small changes. He listened more. He spoke with greater patience. He seemed less rushed. He realized that his encounter with her had softened parts of him he had not known were closed. She noticed changes in herself too. She felt more comfortable accepting help when it was offered with respect. She felt less guarded in safe spaces. She carried the reminder that kindness did not always come with expectations. There were moments when both of them wondered what might have been different if circumstances had allowed more time or fewer responsibilities. But those thoughts did not bring regret. They brought appreciation. Life, they understood, did not always allow stories to unfold fully, but it still gave them meaning. One evening, during a quiet conversation, she told him that the night she stayed at his place had become a turning point for her. Not because of what happened, but because of what did not happen. There had been no pressure, no demands, no assumptions. That had restored a small piece of her trust in people. He told her that opening his door without thinking had reminded him of something he had forgotten, that helping someone did not always require certainty. Sometimes it required only decency. Their connection, shaped by timing and understanding, remained steady but light. Neither of them felt trapped by it. Instead, it felt like a shared chapter that had added depth to their lives. As the months passed, both continued forward on their own paths. They carried lessons instead of expectations. They had learned that real-life connections were not always meant to last forever, but they could still leave lasting impact. Part 4 of their story was not about closeness or distance. It was about balance. It was about two people choosing respect over attachment and honesty over comfort. It was about understanding that sometimes the most meaningful relationships are the ones that teach without asking to stay. And quietly, without either of them fully realizing it at the time, they had both grown stronger, not because they held on tightly, but because they knew when to let life unfold naturally. The final change came quietly, the way most real endings do. There was no single moment that announced it, no clear sign that something was finishing. Life simply continued to move, and both of them moved with it. For him, the seasons shifted as they always had. The mornings grew cooler, the days shorter. He followed his routine, but with a deeper sense of awareness. He noticed things he once overlooked, The way light touched the land at sunrise, the small sounds of evening settling in. He had become more present, more thoughtful. He still thought of her, but not with longing or uncertainty. It was more like remembering a lesson that had changed him. He understood now that some people entered a life not to stay, but to teach. And what she had taught him stayed rooted deep inside. They spoke less often as time went on. Not because of distance or discomfort, but because both were fully engaged in their own paths. When they did speak, it felt natural, like catching up with an old friend. There was no pressure to maintain something that no longer needed defining. One day, she told him she was preparing for a major step forward in her life. Her message was brief but meaningful. She sounded steady and confident. He could tell that she had found clarity, and that gave him peace. He replied with encouragement, reminding her of her strength. He did not offer advice or questions. He trusted her judgment. That trust felt like the final gift he could give. When she eventually left the area for good, he heard about it through a mutual acquaintance. He was not surprised. He felt calm. He wished her well silently, knowing she would continue forward with the same quiet courage she had always shown. The house felt the same after that, yet different. He walked past the room where she had once sat by the window. It no longer felt heavy or emotional. It felt complete. That chapter had closed gently, without regret. He realized something important then. The story he would remember was not about who stayed or who left. It was about how two people met honestly in a moment of uncertainty and chose respect over fear. He shared the experience with very few people. It was not something that needed explanation or validation. It was personal, grounded, and real. Some stories lived best in reflection rather than retelling. Over time, he noticed how that experience influenced his choices. He became more open to helping others without expectations. He listened more carefully. He judged less quickly. The lesson had reshaped his character in small but lasting ways. Years later, he would sometimes think back to the morning he woke up to find her there. What had once felt confusing now felt meaningful. He understood that life did not always prepare people for important moments. Sometimes it simply placed them there and trusted them to respond with decency. She, too, carried the memory forward. Though their lives moved in different directions, she never forgot the night when she had been offered space without demands. It became a reminder that kindness could exist quietly, without needing recognition. That memory strengthened her during difficult moments. It reminded her that the world was not only shaped by struggle, but also by understanding. She held on to that knowledge as she built her future. They never met again. There were no reunions or dramatic endings, and that was exactly how it was meant to be. Their connection had served its purpose. In the end, the story was not about a stranger in a room or a promise of one night. It was about timing, trust, and the power of small human choices. It was about two lives briefly intersecting and leaving each other better than before. And long after everything had moved on, the meaning of that night remained clear. Some encounters change a life not by staying forever, but by showing what is possible, even if only for a moment.